sure what you all want at this point. The way this tour works is Natalie and Cody are the show, and a faculty member comes along with the team. I'm a member of the Committee on International Discussion and Debate, and what is advertised to hosts is that in addition to the debaters, you can get a lecture from me. The lecture that I'm supposed to give is on the role of debating in American politics, and I'm not sure how to connect the debate you just saw to a lecture on the role of debate in American politics. So I think what I'm going to try to do, and this is what's been suggested to me kind of on the fly, is maybe make a few comments on the debate that I just saw, and then maybe just a few comments that would have been the lecture really shrunk down to just a few words. I think it was a very interesting debate, and not planning on giving a critique, but having just a few seconds to think about the debate. Well, what I always like to try to do in a critique is not make a decision publicly, because if you do that, your critique becomes, here is the reason for my decision. What I would rather do is point to some good things and some bad things that I saw on both sides. Because people always learn from the good, right? And people always learn from the bad, right? So, in no particular order, I think it was really shrewd on the part of the negative team to try to avoid offering a specific disadvantaged scenario by arguing that the threat is changing every day. That is an interesting strategic move, because it basically takes the negative out of the business of offering a scenario, and as you all know, all scenarios can be refuted, and puts the negative on very interesting grounds of saying, we don't know, it could be different tomorrow, it could be different the day after that, and because of this very, very volatile situation, we have to have the U.S. presence. I thought that was a very interesting strategic move by the negative team. Second general observation, the necessary cost argument. I personally was feeling very uneasy at the notion that the rape of women in Okinawa was a necessary cost, that the murder of innocent people in Okinawa was a necessary cost. Now that's realpolitik, I guess, but I was not happy as a judge with that necessary cost response. I was surprised, though, affirmative team, that the second affirmative rebuttalist totally conceded it, because that's the argument that I would have stood up and did everything but concede. So I think the affirmative may have missed an opportunity there to make a strong moral stand and maybe make a very strong human rights stand, a very strong women's rights stand by conceding the second advantage. Fourth thing I would say is, if I can read my notes, third thing, did I say two things? Yeah, I did. 1, 2, 3. Fourth thing I would say is that I think the affirmative, although I have a hard time personally believing some of the evidence in the first affirmative speech, I think the affirmative did a good job pulling that affirmative scenario evidence through the round. Now, what the negative did was try to minimize the ability to avoid all of those bad things by saying, it's not all that much money we're talking about. It's not really a big deal. To which the affirmative responded in the last speech that it's not just the money that is being spent for host nation support, it's other things that are being talked about. But what I think the affirmative did a good job with was constantly reminding us of that first affirmative evidence. As I say, I think the first affirmative evidence is a bit extreme, but throughout the debate we kept hearing the evidence that supported some pretty strong scenarios under the first advantage. The last general thing I'd say is on the counter plan. I think the negative team I think the counter plan of the negative team was weakened by the cross-examination. When you were cross-examined by Cody. We needed, I think, a better sense of how the counter plan was distinctly different from the plan. And not being able to say, the counter plan, will be 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%. The effect of that was to turn the counter plan into not much more than the plan. I think better responses were necessary when you were cross-examined. So those are some things that I think the affirmative did well, some things that I think the negative team did well. As I was flowing, I was not flowing with making a judgment in mind. I was flowing just because that's the way you listen to a debate. You flow. But those are the things that struck me, positive and negative, as I listened to the debate. I think it was a good debate. Good debates are always characterized, this is sort of debate 101, clash, and there was a clash. Good debates are characterized by strategy, and there was strategy. Good debates are characterized by not the same position repeated over and over again, but by developing positions, and there were developing positions. So I would say, especially those of you who are not that familiar with debate, you saw a very good debate. So some things positive, some things negative, but in general, a very good example of this particular genre. Now, as for my lecture, I'm not going to use the PowerPoint. Just a few minutes. You may wonder what you're doing today, debating, has to do with the real world. And there is debating throughout government, but certainly the debating that you may be more familiar with in the United States is the debating that occurs during the presidential elections. I've gotten questions on those debates from several audiences before today. Now, I could go through a history of, the presidential debates, but let me cut it short and say that when they first came on the scene, the first presidential debates were in 1960, not farther back in time, 1960. A lot of people didn't like them because they didn't look like what you just saw. They didn't have obvious clash. They didn't have back and forth. They didn't have one candidate speaking and the next candidate responding and the first candidate responding again. They didn't look like debate as we practice it as an academic activity. But those debates are the most widely watched event in American politics. Later research showed that there was indeed clash, although you had to, as an audience member, construct the clash, that the debates did cause the relatively few numbers of undecided voters to make up their mind one way or another, and that the debates did cause support to strengthen and people who might not show up and vote to show up and vote. So the debates were not like what you just saw, but they were nonetheless very powerful, very important events in American politics. And there have been some instances down through history in the United States post-1960 where the debates had a devastating effect because a candidate made a mistake or was thought to make a mistake. So although they're not like the academic exercise, they are still very important events. Now, one last thing. Over the past several elections, people who know debate like you do or you're going to have actually finally gotten involved in working on these debates. There has been for a while a commission on presidential debates. There are academic people who know a little bit more about debate involved in the commission. And some of the candidates are actually turning to people who know debate to help improve the activity. So I think you will see, if you watch the presidential debates in the future, a bit more of what you do coming onto the stage. Those of us who coach debate and also study these real debates wish that we could actually get presidential candidates to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We wish there was something more like the exchange you saw here this evening when we get the candidates up in front. The candidates tend to give, person A's 2-minute speech, and then you hear person B's 2-minute speech, and that's it. We wish we could get something going more like the back and forth over several speeches that you've seen this afternoon. And we're working in that direction. Some of you may have heard of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Besides Cody and Natalie, maybe 3 of you. A lot of people in the United States think that back in the middle of the 19th century, these were the first presidential debates. They weren't. Lincoln and Douglas were running for the United States Senate. But they did something really neat. They went county to county to county in Illinois, and they debated each other for 4 hours. People gathered around and watched Lincoln and Douglas go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. If John F. Kennedy had lived, he and Barry Goldwater in 1964 were going to go state to state to state and have real debates. And those of us who are involved in debate and in political communication research hope that down the road the candidates will do something like that. Because then, although there won't be a first affirmative rebuttal and there won't be a 2-minute period of cross-examination, there will be the energy, there will be the development of arguments, there will be more issues thought through more fully. There will be more of what you do in the presidential debates. The presidential debates are interesting, they're impactful, but those debates could profit if they manage to bring in more of what this activity does and more of what you saw here this evening. So that's a little bit of my lecture, not much of it, and I guess I kind of did tie it to what went on this afternoon. Presidential candidates are never going to sound like this, like what you just heard. But they can do a lot more of what you saw. And again, we're hoping that maybe there will be down the road 2 presidential candidates who won't be so staged in debating, but we'll engage in something that is more high energy and features more development, like the kind of debate you're doing, you're beginning to do, and maybe a few of you are thinking of doing. So the three of us are honored to be here. The three of us have enjoyed this tour, and if we've done nothing else, we hope we have encouraged you to keep on going in this interesting, valuable activity. Thank you very much.